to revisit any of the content, if you want to share it with any members of your team in your business, then you've got an option to do that. I'll send you, after today's session, I'll send you 2 resources. I'll send you the recording of the session. I'll also send you a copy of the slides as well. So you have both of those as references after today's session. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us and for being on time as well. So let's make a start. I worked for a really good MD a few years back, and Kevin will know who I mean. Hi, Kev, good to see you. And he used to have this mantra. The mantra was never punish the punctual. So if you attend a meeting and people are on time, get started. And those people who are a bit late will play catch up in their own time. So let's make a move on today's session. You should be able to see my screen. Everyone can see my screen okay? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about the psychology of buying and really thinking about what's most important when we're in sales conversations and in sales roles in businesses, actually understanding what are the things that are motivating customers, what are the needs they have, and how do we really help them to make the right decision to buy? Because that's what we're really trying to do in sales. It's less about trying to pitch or sell something to someone. It's much more about understanding what do they need to do in order to feel confident to buy. So that's the lens through which we're going to look at today's session. And I really enjoy running these kind of workshops where you get hopefully a bit of time to yourself, a bit of thinking time. So and often it's useful just to remind ourselves that that's what this is. So today's session is an opportunity for you to kind of slow things down, create a bit of space for yourself, and think hopefully a bit more clearly about the topic and the things that we're talking about today. And what we're going to talk about is, I said about the psychology of buying. We'll talk about customer touch points and what it takes for customers to start to move and be influenced to move along and make a decision. We'll talk about the customer journey and the decision stages and how the sales process can and should align with those sales stages. And I've got some interesting statistics for you on customer decision making and what that now looks like. Many of you, I'm sure, will be selling in business-to-business environments. And actually what we are seeing is that the B2B sales environment is changing, as you would expect. You know, there's constantly change, but some of the latest insights around customer decision-making, which hopefully will be useful for you. Then we'll talk about what it takes to start to really understand how do you help your customers, start to shape your customers thinking about what they need and what they're motivated by. And then we'll kind of look at a couple of other principles, and then we'll wrap up, and we will be done before 2 p.m. So we've got a lot to fit in, but we'll get it all done. And then at the end, I run sales training programs. I run lots of different programs with clients. I've got a program offer that I'll just talk to you about how that program works at the end, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So no hard pitch, but just some ideas that hopefully are useful for you today. And if you'd like to have a conversation with me after today's session, you'll have the chance to do that as well. Okay, so let's make a move. Firstly, thanks for coming. I think most of you will know me or know of me. Just I won't go too deep into this, but something I learned over the years. So I've been in sales now, sales, leadership, and coaching. One of those 3 different roles in businesses for about 32 years now. Yeah, 1990, about 32 years. I know I don't look old enough, but 32 years doing this. And you learn a lot over the years. I've worked for some really good organizations, had lots of different development opportunities, thankfully. And what I've learned over the years is that it's really easy for us to start or us or our teams to start to slip off track, and for inconsistencies to start to seep in to the way that we work. And actually, sometimes all you need, and hopefully today is going to give you some of this, is an opportunity just to recalibrate, go back to, you know, how do I engage myself? How do I make sure that what I'm doing is consistent and is in line with the performance level I want? And that's what drives results. And it sounds really obvious when I say it, but a lot of the businesses I work with have just lost sight of some of those fundamentals. And today we're going to cover quite a few of those fundamentals. And along the way, since I've worked for myself in the last 8 years as a coach and a consultant to organizations, I've had a bit of recognition, which has been great. And I've also written a book. If you haven't had the chance to look at the book, Inspire, Influence, Sell, I would genuinely recommend it. Obviously, I would because I wrote it. But the feedback I get on a regular basis from people who have read the book, have applied the models and the principles is really outstanding. So I genuinely encourage you to look up the book and and give it a read. It will definitely give you some insights that will be useful. And some of those insights will be part of today's webinar. So let's start with a quick kind of poll. I like to get a poll underway early on when I get the chance. So this question is about how many touch points do we think it takes to engage a new customer? So is it just the one? Is it between 2 and 7, between 7 and 12, between 13 and 19, between 19 and 27, or between 28 and 36? And this was research that was done in 2020 by this company, Tangible Words. And they were basically researching buying patterns, buying behaviors in business to business organizations, literally as COVID was kind of at its height. So, what we've seen is a legacy from COVID that's really hanging over, I think, a lot of businesses in the way that they're operating. So just pick one of those that you think it might be, and I'll share the results in a second. Good. Yeah, we've got 80% of people have voted. Brilliant. That's good enough for me. Right, let's end the poll and I'll show you the results. This is what you thought. So you should be able to see that. 48% of people think it's between 7 and 12. 33% of people think it's between 2 and 7. 14% 12 to 19. 5% think it's 19 to 28. I thought it was 7 to 12 myself before I found out about this research. It's between 28 and 36, and that was a huge surprise to me. But what it shows is and demonstrates that people have so many different messages coming at them now that what it takes for them to actually engage and become a new customer has changed. It's much more. It takes much more effort on behalf of our organizations in sales and marketing communications, and that's important for all of us to remember, because actually it's more difficult now than it has been in the past. And so we think about what steps the customer goes through. They need to go through a lot more touch points now. And when we say touch points, it might be an email communication, it might be a social media post, it might be a direct message, it might be a phone call, it might be a combination of all of those things. And you might have to follow up multiple times. And you'll see this as a theme. I'm sure you're seeing it in your businesses already. I certainly see it in my business. And one of the things that I like to map and have as something that I guess is a bit of a guide for me and the way that I work is thinking about the customer journey and the sales process. So I just want to go through this because I pulled this together a little while back, and it kind of keeps coming back round and round as being something that's useful for clients. And the first thing when we think about the customer journey is this whole principle. Everybody's aware of the traditional sales funnel, and the traditional sales funnel looks like that. But actually, what it does is misrepresent what actually happens in a sales funnel. Those of you who have been in sales a long time will know that actually in a sales funnel, it makes this assumption that gravity draws the customer down through the pipeline. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. As sales professionals, or if you're in business development, or you have some responsibility for commercials in an organization, you know how much effort it takes to draw customers through a funnel, and it doesn't happen on its own. So I like, when I think about the customer journey, to reverse the funnel and remind ourselves that gravity acts against us in the sales process. If we aren't continually following up, if we don't have a structured approach to being able to nurture and draw customers through the funnel, they just will not come through on their own. So I like to think of the customer journey on the left, sales process on the right. Customers start their journeys with us and with B2B providers, unaware that there is an opportunity to change or make an impact. And some of the basic work we have to do, some of the foundational work we have to do, is just the right preparation. Do we understand the market? Do we understand the customer? Do we understand our own proposition? Do we understand the kind of needs that customers have? Have we got evidence that is useful and compelling so that those early messages to customers can get their attention? And that preparation is really important work, and it's so often missing in organizations. But that first step, we do the preparation, we do some outreach messaging, we're thinking about all of these different touch points with customers. We start to move the customer to the first step. And that first step is, okay, you've got my attention. Once we have customers' attention, and we've kind of got some engagement, then our job early in the cycle is to start to share insights with the customer, things that the customer isn't aware of. It might be trends, it might be data, it might be case studies, it might be new legislation, whatever business you're in. But the idea of those early insights is that once you've got the customer's attention and you share an insight, you move them from attentive to interested. Now, getting customers from unaware to attentive to interested is fairly straightforward stuff. Okay. Where the real challenge happens is to move them to the next stage. The next stage is to have a desire to change. Okay. So we can get people's interest quite easily. Getting people to change is tricky. And the way that we do it is to actually start to drill into what does this customer need in order to feel excited, in order to feel motivated, and sometimes even a little afraid of staying where they are. How do we help the customer to get to that stage in their decision making where they think, I need to do something differently? And that can only happen from the inside out. That has to be driven intrinsically by the customer. And so needs and asking about the customer's needs, asking great questions, listening carefully, we'll talk about that during our session today, is what helps the customer to not only process their thinking and helps us understand how we help them to make the right decisions, but it also helps the customer to move themselves from being just interested to having a desire to change. Now, that's really important because when the customer is in a state of desire, they want to change, that's when they're ready to listen to a solution. And the number one mistake I see over and over again, and that I made for the first, I'd like to say first couple of years of my sales career, probably closer to 5. The mistake I made the first probably 4 to 5 years was that I was pitching a solution way before the customer had expressed their needs and had a chance to really digest what they were thinking and process things and share ideas with me and build that level of trust where they thought, actually, Justin's the guy that could help, right? I was pitching the solution too soon. But when you pitch the solution with a customer whose needs you truly understand, and from that position they say, yeah, actually, this is something I'd like to learn more about, and they almost invite you to talk about the solution, then everything changes. When you talk about a solution to a customer that's got a desire to change, they're much more likely to want to then take action. Now, when a customer wants to take action, they'll normally say something like, okay, so how does it work? How do I get on board? How do I get involved? So that obviously is a buying signal. And when customers make buying signals, that's our chance to start to move from the whole sales process is about the customer to now it becomes about how we can lead and help the customer. So we make proposals. This is where we have to demonstrate leadership. We start to demonstrate to the customer the expertise we have and how we can help and why we know they will get the outcome or result that they want. And that means the customers then much more likely to say, okay, not only will I take action, I'll actually make a commitment to become a customer with you. And interestingly, that even when a customer says, yes, I'd like to do something about this, they don't always follow through. So what we have to do when a customer says, yes, this is something I'd like to do, we have to, at the final stage of the process, create some form of commitment. And we do that through creating immediacy and urgency, just helping the customer to understand what the next steps are and how we can help them to take those steps and agreeing them with the customer. And again, it's a very common area where we just, sometimes a customer says yes, people get overexcited, high five, leave the meeting, and they haven't got that next step confirmed. It's a really common kind of gap in sales methodologies and sales cycles. And ultimately, of course, that kind of concludes where we might think tactically and from an action perspective around the sales process. But what we really want is clients that really start to become loyal to your business, that become partners, that really want to do more than just transact and don't just talk about price, for example. And we do that through a process of reflection, improvement, and evolution of the sales conversation. So I talk you through that because I find it really useful as a reminder to myself and also useful as a way to kind of start to map what's happening with your customers. And in the book, I talk about the cycle. So you'll see that as a linear series of steps. I like to think of sales as cycles. We're really thinking about going through cycles of conversations with customers, picking back up where we left off, creating that value and continually improving and evolving the relationship, but also the wants, needs, and desires of the customer and the way that we can satisfy them. So the cycle you'll see in the book if you choose to pick it up. And then if we think about what's happening about or with customers and about the decisions they make, it's really interesting, the evidence. The CMO Alliance have done a lot of research on this. And there's this 95-5 rule in B2B marketing that you may or may not have heard of. But what it says is that only 5% of your potential audience are actually in the market. So as you're going out to the market to talk to your potential customers, only 5% are actually in the market to do something. And the rest may not be ready for months, sometimes even years. And they might not even know, that they have a need, or that you have a capability to satisfy and deliver on that need. So actually recognizing that is really useful, because you start to qualify more effectively when you recognize that actually there's 5% ready now, and that five, then the 95% are always going through those stages and steps that we talked about as we looked at that customer journey. And if we think about B2B, business to business sales cycles, they're generally longer. And that is reflective, of course, the complexity of businesses, obviously compared to individual B2C or business to customer cycles, where you're dealing directly with the end user. And what it shows is that the average B2B buying cycle is somewhere between 6 and 12 months longer than business to consumer customer journeys or cycles. So we have to start to recognize that we've got a smaller number of customers that are ready now, and then we've got a longer sales cycle that B2B customers are going through. And then the final piece to this puzzle, which I guess really kind of draws it all together, is thinking about decision makers, and knowing that the average buying group has grown to include at least 10 to 11 stakeholders in larger, more complex business to business sales. And what that means is that it's obviously not only going to take us a little longer, but it's going to take a little more effort to qualify and engage all key stakeholders. So you start to think about your larger key accounts, your more I guess valuable opportunities in your team's pipelines, but also those more significant deals. They are much more complicated than they have been in the past. And there's some evidence that shows for multinational deals, so where you're dealing with multiple countries, that buying teams expand to an average of 15.2 people. So 15 people in the decision-making process. And over half of buying groups, if you look at larger sales, now include decision makers at vice president level or above. And I guess that means actually changing the message, because a senior person in an organization needs to hear a different message than the person who's going to be using the solution day to day in the organization. So we start to think differently about how we influence and engage these people. And as you start to think about what needs to happen, what you need to do to change the approach for selling to customers, I love this information from the National Sales Executive Association that talks about the follow-up process. So 48% of salespeople never follow up with a prospect. 25% of salespeople make a second contact and stop. 12% make 3 contacts and stop. Only 10% make more than 3 contacts. Okay, so that's the sales activity. Then this is where it gets really interesting. 2% of sales are made on the first contact. 3% are made on second. 5% on third contact, 10% on fourth contact, and then an incredible 80% of sales are made on the 5th to the 12th contact. And if you're in sales, if you're leading sales teams, and you must have had this same experience. I have this same experience. If I shared my WhatsApp messages with you with different prospective clients that I talk with on an ongoing basis, you would see that I message some people not the same message, different messages, but you'll see that my WhatsApp chat is me messaging them multiple times, probably 5 to 12, and then all of a sudden I'll get a response. And what happens is if your teams don't have that level of discipline and perseverance, then it's really easy to just kind of drop off people's radar, and the opportunity goes cold. And it's really incumbent on us to think about not only that volume, and volume is important, but so is quality. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves, I love this acronym for PUSH, to kind of keep going. We should persevere until something happens in sales, right? Persevere until something happens. And sometimes that something is someone saying, thanks for following up with me. We're not in the market for this anymore. We've made a different decision. No problem. At least you now know. Sometimes it's people saying, I'm really sorry. I've been super busy. We've had lots going on. and actually the time is now right, because your 6 to 12 months might have elapsed. So this is really important for us to get our minds around. It's buying psychology, but it's also sales psychology, what sales teams need to do to break through in the current environment. And we talk about we talk about quantity, which is one part of it. You know, they say sales is a numbers game, and that is absolutely true, but it can't be just volume. You can't just keep sending really poor or really unarticulated messages to customers. We have to get quality right as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I love this Steve Jobs quote: "Your customers don't care about you. They don't care about your product or service. They care about themselves. They care about their dreams, their goals, and they will care much more if you help them reach those goals. But to do that, you have to understand the goals as well as their needs and their deepest desires." So we'll tap into this as we go through today's session. And I always think about the reason why for a customer. If a customer says, "I'm too busy," or "We've got a lot going on," or "I can't do that right now," very often it's a reflection of their own perception of the value you can create. And that the only person that can change that perception is us, right? We're the only one that can change the perception someone else has of us. So we have to kind of almost earn the right to create value with the customer. So I always think about it as cutting through the noise. So there's lots of noise going on for customers. We talked about, how many decision makers there are, the length of the sales cycle, all the other stuff that's going on. Very often it's our job to cut through the noise. And the way we do that is to take an approach that's more engaging with clients. And what does that mean? It means we have to start to think about the way we communicate with people, especially early in relationships, to think about the way we communicate differently. And I think about 3 principles. I'll talk about those 3 principles. The first principle, we've all heard the term customer first or client first. I think we need to scratch that, and we have to think in those early messaging, it's customer only. So we have to think about messaging that is only relevant to that customer. That means it's personalized, it's tailored, it's all about them. You're not just putting out a generic standard message. You've done some work and you understand them enough to be able to send a message that is really, really personal. Okay, so it's a personal, customer-focused message. The second principle is that customers don't buy. If you think about yourself as a customer, customers don't buy products or services, they buy outcomes. So whatever you're buying it because of what it will do for you, whether that's a feeling you're trying to create, a problem you're trying to solve, or something you're trying to achieve. You're buying the outcome that the purchase will give you. And we have to, very often we forget that. We start, "I've got this great new product, right? I've got this great new idea." That's not what customers buy. They buy the outcome of your new product or your new idea. And remembering how to tailor the language so that we are articulating that is really important. And then the third principle, I call it the power of peers. And it's basically peer references. So instead of saying, "I've got this great product," I might say, "Other customers with a similar profile to you tell us that they absolutely love the value they're getting from this product." And it sounds like a long way round, but the difference it makes is quite incredible, actually. And we talk about other customers that are gaining that value. And a few things happen. When you start to talk about other customers and their results rather than what you can do, you get a level of external validation and authority that builds within your prospective customer. And 3 things happen through that process and through the language that you use. One is that the customer gets curious because they start to think, well, if you can do this for somebody else, then perhaps you could do it for me. The second thing that happens is that they get reassured. So they think, okay, this isn't, it's not your first rodeo. You're not using me as a guinea pig on this. And then the third thing that happens is they start to get a sense of, everyone knows what FOMO is, right? So fear of missing out. So I start to think, well, if you're working with other people like me and I'm not doing this, am I going to get left behind? Is there something here that I should be leaning into? And all of these things start to change the way the customer perceives their opportunity to buy with you. But it happens very early in the messaging. If we get this wrong at the start, instead of tuning people in, we tune them out. And sometimes it happens without us even realizing, because we're using, standard scripts or standard messaging or company literature that might be a bit too product focused. and actually dissecting that, peeling it back and thinking, right, from the customer's perspective, how do I apply these three key principles, really helps you to dial in the messaging to customers. So customer only, outcome focused, and using a language that is more about other customers, like your prospective customer getting value. If we start to change the messaging from that perspective, it really does help. And then that's about getting customers engaged. And then we start to think about, getting time with customers, because of course in sales it's all about interactions, relationships, and getting time, quality time with customers. One of the things that I am constantly reminding myself of is these couple of questions. One is, why should this customer trade time that they could be doing something else for time with me? So I have to make that valuable. Okay. The other thing is, I think about what will make this customer think this sounds really important. It's so important that I have to see Justin. And starting to think like that and make your messaging align with these questions and these principles can really help just to improve the way in which you create value early on in those, whether it's outreach messaging, whether it's calls you're making, whatever way you are interacting with customers in the early stages. Really starting to think about these principles changes the level of engagement that you'll get. So that's the kind of early stages around what's happening with the customer journey, the way they're thinking, and assuming we can get a customer engaged. Then actually it's about helping customers to buy, and helping them to buy in a way that is much more around what they're trying to achieve. So let's talk a little bit about, I call this stage in our Inspire sales process the needs discovery. So what does the customer really need from us? And the only way to do that, only way to truly understand what a customer needs, and sometimes these are obvious things, but it's worth running over them. In order to do that with a customer effectively, you have to be interested. So even if it's something you've heard time and time again, be interested in the customer. Second is to ask open questions. So ask questions that allow the customer to talk and think and expand. And then the third is to listen carefully. And those three things sound so fundamental that you think, well, come on, Justin, that's really basic. It's surprising how many times I will be, in coaching situations, and simple body language, people perhaps don't look as interested in the customer when they're talking. They're not asking the questions that really allow the customer to elaborate and dip into the right type of needs. And they sometimes don't always listen as carefully as they could. So three fundamentals we have to get right. And I really like the idea of, so we'll cover those. Listening. I love this kind of acronym for listen. So we talked about looking interested, get interested in the customer, involve yourself by responding, stay on target through the conversation, stay on target by listening to the customer, test your understanding by asking, checking questions, evaluate the message. Is what the customer telling you accurate and true? And are you able to fully understand it yourself? And then the N is neutralize your feelings. Sometimes customers will say things that might even make you want to disagree or react or respond. Actually, neutralizing feelings is really important, so the customer has that chance to really open up. And active listening is about tuning in to clients. And I'm sure you know this already, but it's worth going over, repeating and paraphrasing what your client or customer is saying, and then being able to demonstrate that you're listening. So, nodding in, leaning in, matching and mirroring their body language. And it reinforces that you've understood what that customer needs. And then the one thing that I come back to over and over again, because it gets so often missed in sales conversations, is when the customer's finished telling you everything that's really important, is to summarize what they've said. Would it be okay if I just play back to you what I've heard? And then summarize what you've heard, summarize the key points, and then check for agreement. Is that everything? It's really interesting, that summary, because when you summarize, you're doing a number of things for the customer. You're helping them to process and pull together everything they've said. And sometimes customers will go off on a bit of a tangent. So you bring them back to what was really important. And then when you check for agreement, so have we covered everything? Normally when I'm with a client and I'll summarize, would it be okay if I just replay what I've heard? They say yes. I say, you said this was important, you said that was important, you said we have to take this into consideration, and this is something we need to avoid. Is that everything? And they'll go, yeah, that's good. They go, oh, there's one other thing. Now, that one other thing only pops out because I've summarized. And normally that one other thing is quite important. And so the summary helps you and your client to get really clear on what you want. And the final thing about summarizing is that when you make it a habit, and I've made it a bit of a habit, it forces you to be more attentive, because you can only summarize if you've really listened. And of course, when you're more attentive, you're listening, you're summarizing, you're also improving your ability to influence, because the customer feels really heard and understood, and you start to nurture them through their own buying decision making process. So active listening is really important. And I just kind of encourage you to think. I won't ask this question, but I will encourage you to think. As I was going through that, perhaps there were a couple of things that were that popped out for you. But what might you need to work on to improve listening skills? Because there's a lot of evidence that shows listening actually is quite difficult for most people. And there's a number of reasons. We have a lot going on in our minds at any point in time. When you're stressed, your listening response reduces. And if you're stressed in a big customer meeting or there's an important conversation, sometimes it can be really difficult to tune in. So there are things you can do to improve your listening skills. Just have a think about that as you go forward from today's session. And then that's listening. Combined with listening, equally important is asking the right questions. And I love to think about question structure. I'm a big fan of questions through coaching and through consultative conversations with clients, and recognizing there are on the highest level possible, there are 3 types of questions, and we have to know those types of questions and when to use them. So there are open questions, which I'm sure you will all know. We'll just talk about those in a minute. So open questions get people talking. And the idea of open questions is really to help people process, think, and expand. We've then got closed questions. Closed questions can be answered yes or no, and really are good for checking information. Did you mean this when you said that? Have you got any of these? Or how many of these are in your business or whatever? So closed questions, factual checking questions. They're also useful for gaining commitment. Okay, so next steps, end of the sales process. And then we have probing questions. And probing questions are when you might have asked an open question and you haven't got exactly what you want from the customer. So instead of just moving on to the next topic, you just probe and go a little bit deeper. And it's quite simple, but it's also one of those things that's really easy to miss. I asked the customer, what was the most important thing about this? And they told me a generic answer, and I didn't probe any further. I kind of let that go and move on. Really important that we probe into some of those more important areas for customers, even if on the surface it doesn't look as if they're quite clear on it themselves. The probing helps them to gain clarity of what they're really looking for. So when we think about open questions, and interestingly, one of the things that I've learned as a coach and as a sales manager over the years is that people tend to default to closed questions. So lots of people will inadvertently ask closed questions. Are you doing this? Have you done that? Can you do this? Could you do this? Would you do this? Should you do this? All closed questions. And what they'll be met with are customers that answer yes or no. Sometimes the customer will be generous and give you a bit more than that. But if you ask a closed question, you will get a yes or no answer. And the antidote to closed questions is to just remember to start the question with either what or how. And those of you who've been on calls with me in the past, you might remember this. Really, really important. What is it you're looking to achieve in your business? How do you make decisions about these types? And all of a sudden, by cleaning up your questions and remembering to use what or how questions, it makes a huge impact on your ability to discover customers' needs, guide the customer through their own decision making, and start to think about their own motivations for wanting to change. So what or how questions are really, really important to kind of master. And then the other type of open question, which I'm sure you were thinking, is the why question. So the why question can be a really powerful question with the right customer in the right circumstance, but it can also be a trap. And you'll see that I've got why in red. And the reason I've got why in red is because, particularly if you're talking to a client who is perhaps using one of your competitors, and this is a trap I fell into far too many times early in my career. And I would be having a conversation with a customer, I'd got them engaged, and then I'd say, so why are you using that? And because I said, why are you using that? They would get without realizing it, they'd get a bit defensive. They'd start justifying their current or previous decision. And that had the effect of kind of putting me in a box. And I was like, oh God, where do I go from here? So I would end up kind of almost curtailing my own ability to have meaningful conversations with clients just through the questions I was asking. And then I learned these principles about questions and realized that why triggers defensiveness in people. So I shouldn't ask why questions when I'm, trying to understand why a customer's made a decision, or I shouldn't use why questions unless I'm really forensic and specific about it. And there's a couple of occasions where I found why questions are really powerful. And here's when they are. The first one is, I call it in reverse. What does that mean? So instead of saying, why are you using that product? The reverse of that question is, why are you looking to change? That is a really powerful motivation question in the right direction. Gets the customer to share with you their rationale for why they want to do something different. And that's much better than why they did something in the past. So why questions about wanting to change are really useful. Why are you looking to change? Okay. Gets the customer to share their inner motivation. Second time I will ask a why question is specifically to look at motivation. So I might say, why is this so important to you? Or why is it important that you get this decision right? And then customers that answer those types of why questions start to feel motivated to want to change, and they associate that motivation with you having asked the question. But the reverse is also true. If you ask the why question in the wrong context, then you get associated with that why question that causes defensiveness. So I'm to keep it really clear and simple, I stick with what or how questions, and I'm very specific about when I use why questions. And if I haven't got quite the relationship, then I just avoid them at all costs. I wouldn't ask a why question. I'll stick with what or how. So hopefully that's useful for you as you think about, really think about what is it that's motivating your buyer. And when we think about questions, I also like to think about these principles, some psychological principles that you may be aware of. You'll know that our brain thinks. People talk about left brain, right brain thinking. Left brain is analytical and logical. Right brain thinking is emotional, sometimes known as irrational, but it's certainly emotional. Okay, and there's a phenomenon in psychology called hot cognition and cold cognition. Okay. So when we're feeling emotionally charged, when someone's asking us questions that fire up and stir emotions in us, we go into an emotional state called hot cognition. And hot cognition is where we are much more likely to make a decision. When we go into cold cognition, the factual analytical side of our brain, we are much less likely to make decisions. And actually what the evidence shows is that 95% of decision making happens outside of the logical part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. So what it means is that 95% of decisions are made when we're in a highly emotional state. So we drive decisions through emotions, but then we reinforce and rationalize them by logic. And this is really important because if ever you've seen, and I've seen this so many times where a customer has been asked some really good questions about some of the challenges in their business, the impact in their business, the changes they want to make, what that's worth to them, what's the timeline, and then all of a sudden someone will go into, should we talk about the data? And you see the customer's kind of eyes glaze over, and you've gone from hot cognition, a high likelihood of making a positive decision, to cold cognition, and actually somebody just tuning right out and saying, let me think about it. So sometimes we can, without realizing it, move customers from one emotional state where they are ready to buy into another where they're not, without even understanding the impact that we're having. So really useful to think about what state of mind we are helping the customer to adopt, and then where and how we present the right solution to them. And I think about high quality questions, and this will be in the slides that I'll send to you. Just thinking about mapping out what are the key questions that for your business and the types of customers you're dealing with, in the situations that your teams are dealing with, what are the questions that you could and should be asking that help that customer to guide their own buying decisions and move them into a state of kind of hot cognition, so they're ready to make a decision as sooner rather than later, because these things start to speed up the sales cycle when you get people on the right in the right frame of mind as you're asking these questions. So I would definitely, I'll send you these slides, but I definitely recommend, if you haven't done it already, I'm not a fan of sales scripts, but I am a fan of structure and thinking, okay, what are the types of questions we want to ask? How do we make sure that we've got all of the relevant information? But most importantly, how do we help the customer to get into a position where they feel confident that what they're going to buy from us is the best option for them? And we do that through the right questions and coaching and consulting with the customer and the clients. So final thing I want to talk about, then I'm going to open up for Q&A. Final thing I want to talk about is enthusiasm. So when you're in a sales conversation with a customer, and even when you get them into a state of hot cognition, they say, yes, this is something we want to do. The minute we leave that sales conversation, the enthusiasm from a customer starts to wane. Okay, so we can leave someone feeling really, really positive, really motivated to want to do something. And then the minute we walk out, life takes over. Emails keep coming in. There's all sorts of other stuff that's happening for them, and their enthusiasm just starts to drain. And one of the things that I always think about is, if you think about sales situations, we think about the customer, and we think about ourselves in sales. They are like, I think about them as two seats in the front of a car. Okay, so you've got two seats in the front of the car. How many steering wheels are in the front of the car? It's a rhetorical question, right? There's one steering wheel in the front of the car, and at any point that we haven't booked in or scheduled the next appointment with a customer, we've effectively moved into the passenger seat. And I like this analogy that we should always have our hands on the wheel. If we haven't got the hands on the wheel, and that means we've booked the next appointment with that customer, we've agreed it with them here and now, we know the next few steps. We're saying, great, if I send this to you by this date, you'll have reviewed it by that date. Shall we talk in a week's time or 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks or whatever it is, right? Shall we schedule that here and now? If we haven't gone through those final few steps in the conversation, we've effectively lost control of the sales process. And all of a sudden, the opportunities that we have in our pipeline will start to drift. And our 6 to 12 months starts to elapse. And we really need to think about, in terms of being able to shorten that cycle as much as possible, we have to be able to take control at the end of every sales conversation and help that customer to make the right buying decisions, even if that's like a micro decision on the way to the purchase. And really important that we get that into the way that we think. And I also love this analogy of, I learned this, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Someone shared this with me. I love this slide. When we think about sales and the approach to sales, I think about the first, I said, 4 or 5 years of my career before I had proper sales training. And I felt a bit like the guy on the right. I was doing loads of sales activities. I was talking to lots of customers. I was knocking on doors, making phone calls. I was absolutely working as hard as I could. But it was the equivalent when I then learned a sales process and the right methodology. It would like someone to put me on a bike. And it doesn't matter how fit you are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. If you are running and your competition are on a bike, they're using the right structure, the right methodologies. They have a process in place. They're nurturing customers. They understand the sales cycle. If they're doing all of that and you're not, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you will never keep up with the competition. It's a really useful metaphor for us in our businesses. We have to get this right in order to succeed and be able to drive at the level that we want to achieve the targets that we have. Okay, we are about 45 minutes in. I just want to pause now and just give you a chance to reflect from the session, everything we've covered so far. Just take a moment to think, what are the key actions for you that you want to focus on from this workshop? So just take a moment to write those down. If you're feeling in a particularly generous mood, perhaps you want to share maybe a couple of key takeaways. And the chat function, you remember there's a chat function. I'm just going to say, here's the chat, so it should pop up for you. So on your Zoom toolbar, bottom left, there'll be a chat function if you want to put in the chat what your 1 or 2 key takeaways are. The reason I ask that is because very often that's useful for other people on the call to hear what is it that someone else is taking away, because it might be something that they've overlooked or have forgotten in the heat of the moment, because there's so much excitement going on during today's session. At my end, at least, anyway. So I was excited. So yeah, feel free to drop into the chat. What are the 1 or 2 key things that you can take away from today's session? I'd love to hear it, because that's useful for me as well to fine tune content as we go forward. Chris, thank you, Chris. The upside down funnel helps to keep the need for constant activity front of mind. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I completely agree. I love just the concept of it. I wish I could say I created it. I stole it shamelessly. They say amateurs borrow, professionals steal, right? I shamelessly stole that from a session I went on. Yeah, it's a really useful reminder for me as well, because that level of responsibility for us to make these things move forward. Kevin, thanks, Kevin. Great session. Thanks. Apologies. Oh, Kevin's got a sales call. He's going to put it all into practice right now. Good luck, Kevin. Hope it goes well. Antonio, thanks, Antonio. I like the questions. What are you looking to change, and why is this important to you? Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Antonio. Glad they're useful. Sakwat, thank you, Sakwat. Probing, the idea of probing. Yeah, I must admit that's something that early in my sales career didn't even occur to me. I'd ask a question, customer would answer it. Okay, next question. And actually remembering that you don't have to move on. You can stop and go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me a bit more about that. Get the customer just to open up and really go a bit deeper into their motivations and needs. Brilliant. Thanks, Sakwa. Rebecca, thanks, Rebecca. Purchase readiness and length of B2B sales process. Yes, thanks, Rebecca. Don't let it put you off. Don't let it put you off, right? These things are averages. I would say they're averages, and I really do think you can make some changes to these. You can speed up some of these sales cycles and recognize that there's always different lengths of sales cycles. I think that's what's so much fun about sales, because some sales will close quicker than you were expecting, some take a little bit longer, but actually having that dynamic mix is what helps you to really build a successful sales pipeline. Thanks, Rebecca. That's great. Mark, thanks, Mark. Think about your questioning, use open questions and the summarize and summing up key points. Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, there's so many. When I think back to the things that you learn over the years, that summary and the way that summary creates an opportunity to then, really link and segue. I didn't say it, but the other thing about the summary is it's a really good way to segue. Once you've said to the customer, are these all the things that are important? They say yes, or they say, oh, it's one other thing, and you say, oh, so this as well. It's a really nice segue to say, would it be okay now if I share how I think I can help? So it moves us from needs discovery to solution discussion. It's a really nice way to transition from one to the other without it feeling too clunky, because sometimes it can feel like, at what point do I get to do the show to the customer, right? That's the point. Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. Chris, there are no shortcuts, i.e., if you can't prepare a pre-call plan, maybe reevaluate the objectives for the call. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there aren't any shortcuts. You have got to kind of structure things and put that in place to make sure that you get the result you need and you're looking for the customer. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Joe, thanks, Justin. The new updated number of hits required to turn into a customer above 19 will help motivate and keep momentum going. Even more reason to develop more consistency. Thank you, Joe. Absolutely. Yeah. What they say, don't they? Expect the best, prepare for the worst, right? Expect the best, prepare for the worst. And we should always be doing that. Thanks, Denise. Create more touch points to engage the customer. Yeah, it's why omni-channel is so popular at the moment. Can we think about lots of different ways that we can engage customers and move them through that journey? Leigh, thanks, Leigh. I like the push component of the sales psychology. Persevere until something happens. Yeah. Liz, thanks, Liz. Summarizing and summing up. Kirsty, actions. 1, structured questions. Points to cover. 2, defined commitments always set at each deal stage. Oh, nice. 3, find a way to get to 36 touch points. Lol. Thanks, Kirsty. Okay, Joe, to all I can attest, this is all good stuff from a clinical setting as well, if you're talking to patients, because it definitely works for good customer reviews and recommendations, even if it may take a little longer. Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Excellent. Okay. I've got a couple of other slides to share with you, if that's all right. And then before we close, I'd love to take like a picture, if that's all right, of the group. So I will ask if people can come on camera, not right now, but in a couple of minutes, if that's okay. Just give you a chance just to prepare yourselves. If anybody needs to do a bit of titivating in the background, you've got a chance to do that now. But let me just share a couple of other things with you before we close today's session. Thanks everyone for investing an hour of your Friday in this. I hope you've enjoyed it. What we talked about today is kind of touching the surface of what we cover in our sales academies, really with focus on how to implement and go deeper into some of the methodologies. So there's a tool we use called a sales scorecard. We invite you to take the scorecard. We have this really nice e-learning platform, and the e-learning platform is a series of short videos with lots of different content around how to structure your sales conversations. And that's like a learning timeline of about 12 months. We work through a 12-month series of workshops with people. Obviously, there's the book and the content from the book and the models. We have monthly sales mastermind web classes. Denise says my team has done this. It's great. Thank you, Denise. Yes, thank you very much. Lovely. And Chris, actually one of Chris's teams on it at the moment, which is really good. We have a private WhatsApp group, so anybody can ask any question within the group, but they can also contact me directly to get specific advice if there's something particularly tricky going on with customers. And surprising how often those sorts of situations come up. And we're continually evolving the content. So some of the slides from today are built specifically for today. They'll all go into that content as we look at continually evolving the program that we run. So if anybody's interested in these, then feel free to contact me. I really like the idea in Sales Masterminds of creating a number of different factors. So one is confidentiality, so people can bring confidential information, no, it doesn't go any further. The community, so you're working with people that are like-minded, going through the same things, collaborating and sharing ideas and picking up ideas, challenging ideas and challenging people's perceptions so that you've got someone that's not just saying, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, helping you to see a different way through, and then making commitments. So actually, how do I turn what I'm planning to do into action and making sure that happens? So holding people accountable as well. We try and have all of those elements in our sales masterminds. This is the scorecard I mentioned. I'm happily, if anybody would like to take it, I will happily, just let me put that in. Oh, hold on. Let me put that in the chat. I will also put this in the follow-up message to you when I send through the details today. Let me just put that in there you go. We've got the Sales Acceleration Scorecard. And then if anybody would like to, if you want to buy the book, you can do all this yourself. So the book you can get through this link here. It's on Amazon, so you can just Google it on Amazon. But you can work through the book, so you can start to implement this stuff yourself. It's not obviously it's not as straightforward, but the book is designed to be like a manual that you work through step by step. And if you'd like to join our Inspire Sales Mastermind community, we've got a great community of sales professionals on that journey to improving sales effectiveness. If you'd like to join us, do contact me, and I'll happily share more details with you. And then final thing, and then we'll take a picture. If anybody would like a one-to-one, I'm happy to give you a 45-minute discovery session where you can, excuse me, talk about what's going on in your business. If you want some ideas or some kind of coaching on ideas, then that gives you an opportunity to do that. The link I've just shared will take you straight into my calendar, so you can book a 45-minute one-to-one session. Okay, that's everything. Before we go to Q&A, can I just? I'm just going to take a photo. Is everyone all right if we take a photo today? Look, so if you could come on camera, I would appreciate it. And then we'll take a quick shot. Let me get my camera snip up. That's it, snipping tool up. So let's do, thank you. Oh, look at that. What a beautiful crowd. Thank you, everybody. That's great. So let me give you a countdown so you can smile and get yourself ready. Okay. So let's go. So I'll go 3, 2, 1. Okay. So we've got 3, 2, 1, 3. And if you want to look at your cameras, 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. Oh, lovely. Thank you all so much. That looks great. You look amazing. Okay, good. So that is the end of the session. We're 5 to the hour. So if you want to jump off now and go to your 2 o'clock, you are very welcome to do so. If anybody has any questions, if you've got questions you'd like to ask, I'm happy to stick around for another couple of minutes. Otherwise, I'll let you enjoy the rest of your Fridays and hopefully go on to enjoy your weekend in the next 3 or 4 hours. Look at that. How exciting is that? Weekend's almost here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Take care. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Good to see you. Thanks. Thanks. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you soon.